In the 1980s, one man didn't just wrestle, he became a living myth. Hulk Hogan, with his blonde mustache, ripped muscles, and larger-than-life charisma, turned professional wrestling into mainstream pop culture and made millions believe in the power of Hulkamania. But behind the glory, his story is also one of scandals, downfall, and the heavy cost of becoming a legend. Terry Gene Bollea, who the world would later know as Hulk Hogan, was born on August 11, 1953, in Augusta, Georgia, but his childhood unfolded in Tampa, Florida, where the sun was hot, the neighborhoods were working class, and the dream of wrestling superstardom seemed light years away, yet even then he was fascinated by the spectacle of larger-than-life athletes on television. As a boy, he wasn't just interested in sports, he was obsessed, spending hours glued to the screen watching wrestling heroes like Dusty Rhodes and superstar Billy Graham, men who could command a crowd with charisma and raw power, planting in young Terry the idea that one day he too could walk into an arena and have the world chant his name. Yet behind the dream was a boy who struggled with insecurity, with finding his place, and who used sports and eventually music, strumming a bass guitar in local Florida bands, as his escape from the ordinary life that seemed destined for him. Hogan's early life was shaped not only by his passion for sports but also by the physicality that set him apart from other kids, as he grew into a towering frame with broad shoulders and the kind of size that made people stop and look twice, making him a natural fit for the world of athletics. He played baseball with serious dedication and for a while he dreamed of turning professional, but injuries and the reality of limited opportunities in that path pushed him toward other outlets where his physical gifts and his charisma might shine brighter. Music became his first serious pursuit as he played bass in a band called Ruckus, performing in smoky clubs across Tampa, where his presence on stage was impossible to ignore, and while he enjoyed the spotlight, something deeper told him that his destiny wasn't in the bars of Florida but under the bright lights of arenas where legends were made. It was during one of these nights performing in clubs that fate intervened, as professional wrestlers who trained at a nearby gym noticed the massive young man with the commanding stage presence and suggested he consider wrestling as more than just a childhood fascination, opening a door that would change the course of his life forever. Encouraged by their words and motivated by the dream of becoming someone larger than life, Terry Bollea stepped into the world of wrestling training, enduring brutal workouts, long hours of conditioning, and painful bumps that tested whether he had the toughness to survive in the business. He might not have known it then, but those early decisions, made in the sweaty gyms of Florida, would set him on a path that would transform him from an ordinary boy with big dreams into Hulk Hogan, the wrestling phenomenon who would one day define an entire era. When Terry Bollea stepped fully into the wrestling world, he first took on smaller gigs in regional promotions, but it was his sheer size, charisma, and ability to connect with audiences that made him stand out, eventually catching the attention of the World Wrestling Federation, where Vince McMahon saw in him not just another wrestler but the face of an entire industry. Rebranded as Hulk Hogan, he was packaged as the ultimate American hero, a towering figure in red and yellow, with a booming voice and an undeniable presence that could make even the furthest seat in the arena feel close to the action. His rise was sealed in 1984 when he defeated the Iron Sheik at Madison Square Garden to become WWF champion, a moment that didn't just crown him as the company's top star but ignited a phenomenon that would be called Hulkamania, sweeping across America with a force that transcended wrestling itself. Hulkamania wasn't just about victories inside the ring, it was a cultural wave, a movement fueled by Hogan's catchphrases, his incredible look, and the way he embodied the spirit of the 1980s, a decade defined by excess, patriotism, and larger-than-life characters. Kids wore the yellow bandanas, adults filled arenas, and millions tuned in on television as Hogan told them to train, say their prayers, and eat their vitamins, turning him into a role model and cultural icon whose appeal stretched beyond wrestling into movies, commercials, cartoons, and merchandise that sold in staggering numbers. Events like WrestleMania were built around him, and with each body slam, each leg drop, and each triumphant pose to the roaring crowd, Hulk Hogan became not just the biggest name in wrestling but one of the most recognizable figures in entertainment worldwide. By the late 1980s, Hogan wasn't just leading wrestling, he was wrestling, the central figure who carried the WWF into mainstream success, forging partnerships with celebrities like Mr. T, appearing on late-night shows, and headlining pay-per-views that drew record-breaking audiences. He faced off against giants like Andre the Giant, in moments that became etched into history, none bigger than the legendary WrestleMania 3 where Hogan body slammed Andre in front of 93,000 fans at the Pontiac Silverdome, a moment often remembered as the pinnacle of professional wrestling's golden age. With every roar of the crowd and every wave of his massive arms, Hulk Hogan seemed untouchable, the living embodiment of superhero strength and charisma, and yet, even in his greatest triumphs, the seeds of future challenges and controversies were already quietly being sown beneath the surface. By the early 1990s, the golden glow of Hulkamania began to dim, as audiences who once cheered his every move grew restless with the repetitive storylines and his superhero persona, leading to boos and signs of fatigue that signaled the wrestling world was changing faster than Hogan could adapt. The World Wrestling Federation faced steroid scandals, and Hogan himself was drawn into controversy, accused of performance-enhancing drug use, which stained the once clean image of a man who preached vitamins and prayers to his loyal young fans. By 1993, he stepped away from the WWF spotlight, his aura as the invincible hero cracking, and many wondered if the era of Hulkamania had truly come to an end, leaving Hogan to either reinvent himself or fade away into nostalgia. The answer came in 1994, when Hogan shocked the wrestling world by signing with World Championship Wrestling, WCW, bringing his star power to the rival company that was hungry to compete with Vince McMahon's empire, and for a while he resumed his role as the All-American hero. But even there the cheers began to dwindle, as the once-beloved act seemed dated in the face of a grittier, more rebellious era, until 1996 when Hogan made one of the boldest moves in wrestling history by betraying the fans and turning heel, joining Scott Hall and Kevin Nash to form the New World Order. This transformation into Hollywood Hogan, dressed in black with a villainous sneer and a swaggering attitude, revitalized his career, making him the most hated man in wrestling while simultaneously the biggest draw in the business, proving that Hogan still had the power to command an audience, even if it was through their boos instead of their cheers. As Hollywood Hogan, he reigned over WCW with arrogance, creating some of the most memorable feuds of the era, but behind the scenes his backstage politics and insistence on protecting his status as the top star caused friction, with critics accusing him of holding down younger talent who could have carried the company forward. The controversies grew louder, from accusations of manipulating storylines to public criticisms of his selfishness, and though WCW's ratings soared for a time, the cracks began to widen as fans grew tired of the NWO dominance that seemed endless. By the time WCW collapsed in 2001, Hogan's role as both its savior and its symbol of decline was undeniable, and while his star power remained intact, the whispers that he had overstayed his welcome and damaged the business he helped build were growing too loud to ignore. When WCW collapsed in 2001 and WWE reabsorbed many of its stars, Hulk Hogan returned to Vince McMahon's company, and for a brief moment he was welcomed back as a conquering legend, even producing iconic matches like his clash with The Rock at WrestleMania X8 where the crowd roared for him despite his villain role. Yet as years passed, age caught up to his body, and despite periodic comebacks, his in-ring performances were slower, his movement stiffer, and the aura of invincibility that once surrounded him began to crumble in the face of time itself. What truly accelerated the fall, however, were not the limitations of his body but the scandals that spilled outside the ring, dragging his name through tabloid headlines and courtrooms in ways even a leg drop could not overcome. In 2006, Hogan's family life began unraveling under the public eye with the reality TV show Hogan Knows Best, which exposed fractures behind the picture-perfect image of the Hogan household, and soon the troubles turned tragic when his son Nick was involved in a devastating car crash that left a young passenger with permanent brain damage. Lawsuits, public blame, and criticism painted Hogan not as the inspirational father figure he had portrayed in the ring, but as a man whose personal world was spiraling out of control under fame's harsh light. By the time he was embroiled in a messy divorce from his wife Linda and stories of infidelity hit the press, the Hulkster's personal life had become fodder for gossip columns, further tarnishing the legacy he once carefully crafted. The final blow to his public image came in 2015, when leaked recordings revealed Hogan making racist remarks, leading to his termination from WWE and widespread condemnation, a shocking fall from grace for a man once celebrated as a hero to children of all backgrounds. Sponsors cut ties, his Hall of Fame status was suspended, and for years he was cast into the shadows, no longer welcome in the company he had helped build, his name now synonymous not only with wrestling history but with scandal and disappointment. Though he eventually issued apologies and sought redemption, the truth was unavoidable. The hero who once stood for the values of training, prayers, and vitamins had fallen in a way that no scripted wrestling storyline could ever match, leaving fans to wrestle with the painful question of how to separate the legend from the man. Even with the scandals and the irreversible stains on his reputation, Hulk Hogan remains a figure who cannot be erased from the history of professional wrestling, because without him the sport would likely never have crossed into mainstream culture the way it did in the 1980s. He was the first wrestler to truly become a household name, the face on lunchboxes, action figures, and posters on bedroom walls, the man who convinced Hollywood to take wrestling seriously enough to feature it in films, television, and commercials. Fans may debate his flaws and his controversies, but they cannot deny that Hogan changed the business forever, creating a blueprint for how a wrestler could become a global superstar whose influence went far beyond the squared circle. In the twilight of his life, Hulk Hogan remained a figure of both admiration and controversy. Though he never fully escaped the scandals that shadowed his career, his status as a wrestling icon endured. He continued to make appearances at fan conventions and occasionally appeared on WWE programming after being quietly reinstated into the Hall of Fame in 2018. For many, seeing him was a bittersweet reminder of childhood memories, Hulkamania in its prime, larger than life and unforgettable. But behind the scenes, Hogan's health was fragile. Years of punishing his body in the ring had left him with severe injuries. Multiple back surgeries, knee replacements, and hip operations left him struggling with chronic pain. The man who once body-slammed Andre the Giant now moved slowly, leaning on canes for support. Despite the toll, Hogan often spoke with gratitude, reflecting on his extraordinary life and the fans who stood by him through every rise and fall. On July 24, 2025, the wrestling world was shaken when news broke that Hulk Hogan, born Terry Gene Bollea, had died at the age of 71. He suffered a sudden cardiac arrest at his home in Clearwater, Florida. Attempts to revive him were unsuccessful. Just like that, the immortal Hulk Hogan, the man who once seemed larger than life itself, was gone. The outpouring of grief was immediate. WWE superstars, celebrities, and millions of fans around the globe paid tribute to the man who had defined an era. Social media was filled with his iconic yellow and red colors, and chants of "Hulkamania will live forever" echoed across the digital world. Though mortal in the end, Hogan's passing marked the close of a monumental chapter in wrestling history, one that will never be forgotten. Hulk Hogan's story is not just about wrestling, it is about the rise and fall of a man who dared to live larger than life. From his humble beginnings in Florida to the bright lights of WrestleMania, from children chanting his name to headlines exposing his flaws, Hogan embodied both the triumph and tragedy of fame. He was a hero to millions, a villain to some, and ultimately a reminder that even legends are human. His death in 2025 marked the end of an era, but his legacy, both celebrated and controversial, continues to echo in the ring and in the hearts of fans. Because whether you cheered him or criticized him, one thing is certain: Hulk Hogan changed the world of wrestling forever. And so, the immortal proved mortal. But in the memories of those who lived through Hulkamania, Hulk Hogan will never truly die. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful biographies of icons who shaped our world, for better or for worse. And in the comments, tell us, what does Hulk Hogan mean to you?